guys, I'm Bethany Bravery. Welcome back to another episode of the Bringing Her Hope podcast. Guess what? We have another return guest, Stephanie Koontz. Thanks so much, girl, for being back on the show and inviting your husband on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So if you didn't get to listen to the episode, season 2, episode 8, Desperate to Fit In, you want to hear the backstory of Stephanie's story or read her book, all those things are in the show notes. You can find them as well. But today why don't we talk a little bit about, Kyle, your story, and then Stephanie, a little bit of your story, just so we can catch people up if they did miss that episode, and then we're going to dive into a topic together.
So
You're up.
all right. Well, my name is Kyle Koontz, and I am Stephanie's husband. I'm 39 years old. I grew up in a Christian home. Mom and dad were school teachers, worked in investments. I grew up loving sports, grew up in the church. I grew up knowing who God was, didn't know what a relationship with God was. I grew up, went to college, played baseball, and during that time I developed an addiction to pain medication, which eventually went to addiction to heroin and alcohol. It wasn't until when I was 28 years old, I went to Teen Challenge, and Teen Challenge, I learned what a personal relationship with Jesus was. Spent a year there, and also did an internship there, also worked as a counselor there. I met my wife, and we got married and had 2 beautiful boys, Titus and Adley, and also have Aiden. And yeah, that's where we're at.
Mm-hmm. And Stephanie, tell us a little bit about you and your story.
My story, like you said before, it's in the full testimony is in my first book, A Wretch Like Me. But for those that haven't read it, I grew up in a small town, and at the age of 14, I became bulimic just to please a boy. Mm-hmm. And bulimia quickly took over, and it became my addiction. It was my obsession. It's all I thought about, all I cared about. I quickly started drinking just to be able to socialize, because bulimia was such a lonely addiction. That whisper inside told me I was never going to be good enough, and drinking alcohol helped me feel like I could fit in. I went out and partied. I finished high school, went to University of Oregon. I partied my scholarships away. My addiction just spiraled downhill. My little girl was born in 2007. Her name's Carly John, and at the age of 2, she developed ulcerative colitis. And that whisper inside still told me I was never going to be good enough, and that, I was just this horrible person because I could not stop throwing up when I was pregnant with my daughter. And that whisper, I believed his lie so much. And in November of 2011, my little girl, she passed away from complications from her ulcerative colitis. And that whisper was the first thing I turned to. I turned to his comfort and believed his lies, that it was all my fault. And my addiction just got worse. It was to the point where I quit chewing my food because I wanted my esophagus to erupt so that I could just end in my life. I knew something inside of me said that if I killed myself, I would never get to see my daughter again. And so I was just hoping to die. And it got to where I was having seizures from alcohol withdrawals. My body was physically dependent on alcohol. And I would have seizures every week due to not drinking. And so I found from between the hours of 2 and 7 a.m. when I quit selling alcohol that I could drink rubbing alcohol and hand sanitizer, and it would stop the seizures from happening. And that continued for about a year. I found myself in a mental institution with the diagnosis of Wernicke-Korsakoff, and it didn't faze me. When I came out of the mental institution, I went right back to my addictions, right back to my old habits, and got pregnant. I had my son Aiden, and the day after Aiden was born, that whisper inside told me again, you're a failure, you're a horrible mom, you don't deserve him, you're going to kill this baby too. And I went right back to my deep addiction, drinking, rubbing alcohol every day, just to silence the voice within and to find comfort and find a way to fill that giant void inside of me. And finally, the day after Aiden was born, went back to the addictions. And about 6 months later, I lost everything again. The state came and took my son away. And a pastor at a local church convinced me to go to Teen Challenge. And that's where, when I got there, I could stay sober from alcohol, but I wasn't ready to give up bulimia. Bulimia controlled me for 15 solid years, and I couldn't go a day without throwing up. And when I got to Teen Challenge, there was a cross out in the classroom, and I fell to my knees and I begged God. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what I was doing, but God, if you're real, take this from me. And on that day, June 11th of 2014, he delivered me from both of my addictions. And, I learned a lot about who God was, and I just dove in deep, and I wanted more and more of him. I wanted to know, I wanted everything that he could teach me and learn from him. And I completed Teen Challenge and slowly got my son back, got my life back on track. And then I met Kyle, and then we got married, and that brings us to this podcast.
Part two. I love it. So Stephanie, you wrote a new book. That book is Forgiving What You Can't Forget, Admitting What You Don't Want to Admit. So you guys have both walked through addiction, and then you're married, but you have this, surrendered life to the Lord. What does marriage look like after walking through the journey that you had all walked through just individually?
It's happily ever after, right?
Yeah, Hallmark-esque.
So when I met Kyle, I knew without a doubt that he was the man that I was going to marry, because the type of person that I was the adulterous woman. Mm-hmm. I used men before they could use me. And that's just the woman that I was, the girl that I was. And I was the girl that your mom warned you to stay away from. And so when I started talking to Kyle, God delivered that desire for any other man out of me. And so I know it was an experience that I knew in my heart, this is the man that God had for me to marry. And so I'll keep going back to that throughout this, but I just knew without a doubt. So when I met Kyle, we started talking over the phone. He was doing an internship in Bend, and we, not to get right into it, but we jumped God's timing. We both were in love with Jesus. We were on fire for him. We wanted to serve in ministry and help others out of addiction. And we knew the right thing to do, but we jumped God's timing, and we had sex before marriage, even though we told ourselves we weren't going to. We did, and got pregnant with Titus. And so I believe wholeheartedly that a lot of the things that we've struggled through along the way, God intended for us to work them out before we got married. But we wanted to be at the top. We wanted to do it on our timing, and we got married. And shortly after, we had Titus. But when Kyle and I moved in together, right before we were getting married, I kind of saw some red flags from his addiction. Like he said, he struggled. He was a baseball player. He was a pitcher. And so his shoulder hurts, and he struggled with pain pills. But I just saw red flags, not quite sure what they were, didn't really know. And when we got married, we finally moved in with each other. And it was just within a couple of days, I found his stash of, it's a drug called Kratom. It's this green powder. It's legal, but it's still, how would you describe it?
It's kind of a legal opiate, more or less. So people use it in substitute for pain pills, and it helps with pain, can help with anxiety, but it can be abused as well. It can be taken right like anything else, or it can be abused like other things.
And so I always call it a synthetic heroin, but he always corrects me on that. But anyways, so it is good for some people. I've heard a lot of people say that it's great for them. My issue was that he was doing an internship at Teen Challenge, a mentor teaching other men to rely on God to avoid using substances to fill that gap. And so I felt like he was being a hypocrite, and that just hit me so hard. And I remember sitting at my kitchen window, and I was just like, God, you tricked me. And I felt like I had been tricked by God, because here it was, my dreams, my happily ever after, my fairy tale love story, because this is both of our first marriages.
Yeah.
My happily ever after was just shattered within a week of being married, because he was still, in my opinion, in his active addiction. He was sneaking and hiding and lying about it. And I remember just crying to God, and I heard him say, you will walk through fire for a long time. And that is not something a newly married person wants to hear. I wanted to hear the honeymoon phase. I wanted all the love stories and the beautiful happily ever after. And so immediately the trust was broken. That's the biggest thing right there. Immediately the trust was broken. And I would always turn to God every morning, get up, do my devotions, have my one-on-one time with him. And the more that I prayed to God about the situation between Kyle and I, the more I didn't want to hear the truth. I didn't want to hear when Kyle was doing something wrong, because the struggle with Kratom, when I finally brought it to his attention, he made every excuse you could imagine. He lied, he manipulated, he justified all of the signs of an active addict. And it took about 2 years before Kratom was finally out of his life. And that whole time I'm just praying to God, how do I do this? How do I fix this? How can I make this better? And so about 2 years into it, I started pouring into Matt Chandler. He's one of my weekly vitamin pastors. He's amazing. He leads a podcast. He does the Village Church down in Texas, I believe. And anyways, he will openly talk about how the first 7 years of his marriage were miserable. Him and his wife will both tell you it was miserable. And that really inspired me to know that there's hope. We can get through this. But I remember telling God, it's not going to take us 7 years. I can't do this for 7 years. And so after 2 years, finally got a hold of Kyle and got his attention, and Kratom has to go. It had to be removed from our lives. And I remember telling God, see, I told you it was only going to take 2 years. And I could just picture God laughing at me. And so things are finally going good. And I felt like this is what marriage life is going to be like. I had this amazing husband who loves our kids. At this point in time, we had 2 kids together. So now we have 3 boys. And it was a busy, busy household. And I think this is the scariest part, is that we were doing good, but there was so much hurt, so much anger, so much bitterness, and so much resentment on my part from the whole first 2 years of marriage. I felt like he tainted all of our memories with his addiction. I felt like he broke my heart so many times that I couldn't get past it. And so it was almost like I became this evil babysitter just waiting to catch him again in the next lie. And the even scarier part is that I quit talking to God about our situation. I would talk to God about everything all day long, but I avoided that situation, the situation with my husband, because surface level was so much easier than digging deep and dealing with all those root issues. And so after about another year, more red flags started coming up, and something just seemed off again. And so it wasn't the drugs, it was baseball cards. And I know that sounds weird, and I get so mad. Well, I married a man that's addicted to baseball cards. But then I have to stop and remind myself I was addicted to throwing up. And so addiction is addiction no matter what you choose. Addiction is something that takes your focus off of God. Whatever it is that you put before God can become an addiction in your life. And for Kyle, it was baseball cards, and it was almost like a gambling, adrenaline high. He just loved it. He loved collecting them. He loved the rush of finding good deals and buying new ones. But it came to where he was sneaking and hiding and lying, and he rushed the mailbox before. And so it just escalated, and finally it got to a point where I was so angry, so mad that I just couldn't take it anymore. He promised he wasn't going to do it. We had a great heart-to-heart talk. We went on a vacation away from each other. He promised, he swore that I meant more than baseball cards. And it continued for about 6 months, almost a year, of him sneaking and hiding and lying about baseball cards. Mm-hmm. And so in all of this, my heart was hardened. My wall was up. And I had a pocket full of things I was going to use against Kyle. I knew which cards to push. I knew which buttons to push. I knew how to tear him down because I had so much anger inside of me towards it. And that surface level only worked for so long until I finally, I caught him again, red-handed, backed in the corner, and the words came out of my mouth. And I'm done. I want a divorce. I want you out of our house. And I honestly, at that point in time, I prayed that he would find some other girl so that I could be excused from the marriage. And it wouldn't be my fault. It would be his fault. And I had it all planned out in my head. I had this plan B of what my life was going to look like as soon as I could get rid of Kyle. And he did. He listened. He didn't like it, but he did move out. And, I just sat in my anger and my pity party. And I was right. And everything was justified because the addiction had to go. And God put it on my heart, 31 days till forgiveness, start writing. And I just laughed. I was like, yeah, right. There is no way that I'm going to forgive Kyle for what he's done. He's ruined our family. He's ruined our kids' lives. He's ruined my dream come true. He's ruined our marriage. He did this. He did this. He did this. And that's all that I could see was just through my anger filter. And I started writing, and I started writing out my story, and I started writing out from day one, our love story together, how it all worked. And 31 days till forgiveness, he kept putting it on my heart. And so I sat down on my computer every morning, and I decided to do a chapter a day. Whatever God put on my heart, that's what I was going to write out. And I did a chapter a day. And by the time I got to chapter 13, so that's technically where day one is in the book, but that's 13 chapters, 13 days, 13 counseling sessions with God that I had that got to my heart. And so by the time we get to day one in the book, I've already experienced so much healing that I'm just like, no, God, this isn't how I want the book to go. No. But God opened my eyes to my side of the street. God opened my eyes to admitting what I didn't want to admit. And that was that, I kind of skipped ahead a little bit where I want to be, but I wrote the words, so page 112, I want to get there real fast. This is the part that shook my core to where I just woke up and I realized, and I said, my deep need for security is rooted back to that boy breaking my fragile little heart when I was 14 years old. I've never sought healing for it, just carried the pain along with me. And I held it stacked against Kyle. I can see now that Kyle never stood a chance at gaining my trust, because once I was hurt by him, I placed all of the prior hurt that I had been carrying on him as well. And so when I wrote those words, Kyle doesn't stand a chance. I was speechless. And I realized, Matt Chandler says something Matt Chandler has a online marriage conference called Together, and it's on YouTube, but they talk about their marriage in it. But in this sermon that I listened to at this time, when that kept going through my head, Kyle never stood a chance. Kyle never stood a chance. I was listening to this sermon, and Pastor Matt says, hey, if you hate your wife, you probably hate yourself. Flat out said that. And I was just like, that's me. For those that say, I hate my spouse, I hate the things he or she does, I can't live with them anymore. Matt breaks down the verses to show us where the Bible says, well, actually, you probably hate yourself. And it's not that he is innocent. It's that the anger and resentment is coming from a place of your own self-hatred more than it is justified by his weakness and shortcomings as a spouse. And I wrote, spot on. I hate that whisper inside of me. I tried to prove that whisper wrong, and in my flesh, I can't. Over the years, the whisper has compounded and gotten louder, growing and festering my self-hatred deep inside. Kyle doesn't stand a chance silencing the whisper. So I feel like part of the fairy tale that I imagine marriage would be is that my husband would come galloping in on his white horse and finally conquer that whisper for me once and for all. However, that's not Kyle's battle to fight. And so when I saw that all the hurt from all of the men in my past, it was like this big giant boulder that just sealed the brick wall around my heart. And the minute Kyle hurt me, there was no getting through that. And the more I wrote, the more God just layer by layer by layer healed my heart from my past wounds that I placed on Kyle. And so he didn't stand a chance. The minute he hurt me, all of my past baggage came, and I opened it up and I had every card to use. Like I said, But I finally got to a point where I could see my side of the street and realize that, he didn't stand a chance. I was so angry and I was so acting out of my flesh that he did not stand a chance. And so chapter by chapter.
Before you go on, I want to pause for a second. Kyle, I need to know what's going on in your minds. You guys are separated. I don't even know if you know she's writing this book on forgiveness. What's going through when you're kicked out of your house, you're dealing with just wrestling with the possible loss of your family? What's going on in your mind?
It was kind of surreal for the first little bit, and for the first week or so, I wanted to focus on how can I fix it? What can I do? What can I say? And honestly, it just drives you nuts because there's nothing I could do or say to fix her heart or fix or to get her to forgive me. I can't say sorry enough times. I can't, do work around the house or do nice things or get her flowers or whatever else. It had to be God. And so there was a point where, I was out of the house. I was staying at my folks part of the time. And I had to get to the point where I completely gave it to God, completely gave it, all of it to God, because it was tough to go to work every day and be at work and come home and not be here, be at a different home and not have my kids or my family and only get to see my kids here and there. But I learned a great lesson through it too, is that you have to let God handle those things. You try to handle those things and it's gonna tear you apart inside. And it started to, but I stopped it and I wouldn't let it. I said, okay, God, you're all powerful. You've handled way more than this. Story after story in the Bible, example after example of handling huge mountains. Take care of this mountain. And I had to trust him. I realized something I didn't do in my past with Steph is pray for her like I should. And I learned the value of praying for my wife because I had prayed for her without ceasing during that time. Night and day, I was praying for her heart. I knew in my heart where I was at, but I knew I couldn't change hers and it had to be God. So.
I love that posture, whether you meant to do it or not, that posture of, Lord, I can do nothing. So basically, I need to surrender my marriage. I need to surrender my wife to you. And, it would be so easy in our flesh to say, like you listed all those things. Okay, if I just keep the house clean, or if I just date her, if I just woo her, or just pursue her, that stuff is fun and amazing, but that isn't at the heart level of healing. And so I love that you said, Lord, you're bigger, you're greater, and it can be only through you. And you see that through your prayers, even when you guys aren't living in the same household, God is working on Stephanie's heart. Like whether she wants to be typing at that computer or not, like God is doing something. So it gets me excited because there's lots of marriages who are in this in-between season, or maybe they're separated or the divorce papers are almost finalized. And with their earthly eyes, they're looking at what they see physically. And God is doing so much more. So I just want to encourage whoever's watching, whoever's listening in this moment that hold on, you just don't know the end of the story. So Stephanie, go ahead and continue. You're 13 chapters in. What happens next?
And so when I started, there's a chapter that I talk about, I'm typing and I see where God's taking me with this book. I see the healing that he's starting to do. And I'm like, no, they don't know what he's done. No, I haven't talked about the bad stuff enough yet. And God flat out said, it's time. They know what's going on. Everybody knows what's going on. I know what's going on. It's time. And just layer by layer, one of the most healing weekends during that whole time, we had kind of come up with a parenting plan. Some friends of ours had just gifted us a camp trailer, and I wanted to gut it out and remodel it and do it. And it was his weekend with the kids, so it worked out perfect. He was here at the house with the kids. I was outside in the trailer tearing it all apart. And I did make several good choices along this part of the journey. One of them was I chose to listen to life-giving music. It'd be easy to turn on, because I grew up on country music, and it'd be easy to listen to those songs about drowning yourself in a bottle of whiskey or, just one more beer. And I chose to listen to life-giving music. I turned on your radio station, but also I turned on Spotify and I turned on our wedding playlist. And at first it was just, I didn't want to do it. And I knew that God was nudging me to do it. So I listened to the songs that we played at our wedding over and over and over again. And I just filled my heart up with the thoughts and the emotions and our conversations when we picked out those songs, you know, where our hearts were then, and reminded myself of the day that I met Kyle, and knowing that God put him in my life for a reason, and that he is the man that I was supposed to marry. And so through that, I experienced a lot of healing out in that trailer as I was painting and singing and praying. And I spent 2 solid days out there. And I had a huge heart change, but I was so stubborn, and I wasn't going to let him back in, and I wasn't going to let him know that all this was going inside. So he didn't know I was writing the book. He didn't know that I was working on stuff, because I still had that grudge. I still had my pockets full of what I was going to use against him, and I wasn't quite ready to let it go. And it was almost like I wanted revenge. I wanted him to pay for what he did, and I wanted him to know how much he hurt me. And so I kept writing, and you know, God reminded me of this book that has helped me through a lot of stuff. It's by R.T. Kendall. It's called Total Forgiveness. And in it talks about, you know, what forgiveness is, and it talks about what forgiveness is not. And so I took a break in the middle of my book, and I encouraged you to read this book, because it's helped me in so many different situations, through co-parenting, through teen challenge, through family issues. And it's falling apart. It's got different colored highlights for different areas of life. But I got to the part where it talks about the consequences of an unforgiving spirit. And the first one, it says, the Holy Spirit is grieved. And so when I got to thinking about that, you know, if I have this amazing relationship with God, but yet I won't talk about the one thing if I won't talk about the elephant in the room, which is our marriage, then God's just going to kind of sit back. And then the next one it goes to, it says, you're left to yourself. So the consequences of an unforgiving spirit, you are left to yourself. A refusal to forgive means that God stands back and lets you cope with your problems in your own strength. And I was like, that's exactly what I'm doing. And that's why this marriage battle was so hard for me, is because I was trying to fix it. I wanted it my way, my timing, and how I wanted it to play out. That way I could still be in control, and God wasn't doing it fast enough for me. And I read that and started reading those consequences of the unforgiving spirit. It really hit home that God's been trying to steer us away from this mountain for so long. And God had said it to me once before, you know, what if Kyle keeps going around this mountain, not for him to learn something, but for you to react differently? And I know, I heard it the first time, and I was like, all right, I get it. And he brought it up again. Here we are again. So what if Kyle's going around the same mountain because your heart isn't changing? And there was so much wounding inside of me from so many things in my past that it wasn't even about our marriage. It was the deeper issues that were in my heart that God was trying to work on. And I keep saying that God used me to get to Kyle, but it was the other way around. God used the situation with Kyle to get to my heart. And I realized that, you know, part of that huge underlying, that baggage that I kept tucked away and hidden was the death of my daughter. And I was so terrified. I would never say I was a fearful person, because I feel like that shows weakness, and that's not true at all. And I would never say that I was mad at God. And I would never say that I doubted him, but I was so terrified that if I failed this marriage, if I failed Kyle, if I failed at life, that God was going to take one of my kids away again, and that I deserved to lose that. And that was the biggest pillar, I guess, or the cement in the brick around my heart, is that I had to do this. I had to do everything perfect so that I didn't lose another one of my children. And I couldn't see that until God peeled back the layers of the bitterness and the anger and the resentment to get to the core problem that was really going on inside of me. So I was trying to be this perfect wife that fixes everything. I was trying to be this perfect Bible study leader and do my devotions and check all the boxes. And then again, don't talk about the stuff that's really going on deep down. And more healing. And then I remember the day he came to the house for his parenting time. And the chapter that I wrote the day before, it was time for Kyle to move back home. It's time to work on this marriage together. The addiction is now gone. We've gotten to the root issue. It's time for you guys to come back together and work on this together. And I remember him asking me, so what's the plan for next weekend? And again, he had no idea I was writing. He had no idea what I was working on. And I said, well, why don't you just move back home? And he was like a little kid in the candy store. He was so
I didn't believe her.
He did.
It took me over a week too. I was like, I don't know, something's fishy here. I thought something else. I was like, I didn't believe her. It was a complete turnaround from how she was, for sure.
Because I'm
completely different.
Tell you what, the bitterness and the anger, I'll admit it. It consumed me, it controlled me, and I was good at hurting people, hurt people. And I was hurt, I was wounded, and I was going to let everybody know about it. And I needed God to get my attention, and I needed God to peel back those layers, and he's the only one that could do it. And I guarantee if I didn't write this book, I don't think that we'd be married. I think that Satan would have weaseled his way in, and I would have listened to the lies of wormwood, and I would have followed down a path that God never intended us to go to. And so I believe wholeheartedly that if I didn't write this, if I didn't experience these healings, our story would end up differently.
Well, and I think that what was so beautiful, I love the phrase you said as you were at chapter 13, that it was 13 counseling sessions with Jesus. You weren't just writing a book. I think that is like so important. It's that you were allowing the Holy Spirit to speak in and through as you're typing, what is going on, what he's guiding you, what he's teaching you, because I think we can always accomplish more or do more, but it's in Kyle's posture of, I'm going to pray and trust you, with my wife, and your posture of, okay, Lord, I'll write this book for 31 days and see, but I'm going to invite you in to speak to the hard stuff, even when I want to close off that door or close off that window to that topic, and I'll give you everything but that. Y'all both still had this posture of surrender. So that is so important. So what does it look like to now decide we're going to live together? How do you fight old feelings? How does forgiveness continue? Was it a daily choosing of forgiveness? What did that look like?
It's a daily choosing of forgiveness. I honestly think so. Marriage is hard. Sorry, I'm going to jump in here, but marriage is hard. And we have been selfish addicts for a very, very, very long time. And so we're so used to just taking care of ourselves. I'm going to do it my way. And it's not how marriage works. And so for Kyle's, he moved back home 8 months ago or so. So it's been about 8 months. And knowing that our marriage is never going to be perfect, that we are a constant work in progress, that it's dying to ourselves and putting our spouse first. And it's hard to do because we've got 3 boys that are very, very time consuming, busy, they're loud, they're awesome, amazing boys, but it's that season of life of busyness. And Kyle is the one that calls it, we need a date night, we need to go, I want my wife, I want to spend time with my wife without children pulling at us all the time.
I say it all the time.
And I'm the one that I just want to hold my babies and I want to hold them tighter. And so it's hard for me. I just have to be better about making the time, get a babysitter, and then go on date night. But I think that, it's something that you just got to choose to work on. Love is an action. You have to put it into action. So we can choose to not deal with it or not work on it today, or we can choose. I ordered him for his birthday this little date package that comes in the mail. And we've done stuff like this before. And Kyle's like, you actually have to do it, Stephanie. You have to call the babysitter and we have to do it. But it's yoga. It's yoga and all these calming oils and stuff. And so we're going to do it together. But he's right. We can order the books. We can do the self-help books and the Bible studies together. But if we don't do it, if we don't put the action behind it, then it's just going to stay surface level. But I know that the layers are working tremendously through us, because the other day I was frustrated. We've had a rough season going on here with outside issues, and I was just at a place where I needed time alone with God. And so he was home with the kids just this last Saturday morning, and I disappeared to the garden, not for an hour, not for 2 hours, but it was 3.5 hours. I was gone. And Kyle comes out and he's just like, all right, what's going on? When you disappear like this, something's going on. And so I was able to tell him, here's what me and God have been talking about. And it was those deep heart to heart. Kyle knew where I was at, and he knew that I just needed time with God. And it wasn't anything that was between us, but I needed that space. But just that connection now that we have, that we know that we're both chasing after God. And so I think that's an overwhelming piece to know that his heart's chasing after God, the same as my heart's chasing after God. And so we're headed in the same direction.
To answer your question, I would say things, now you have to realize that they're perfectly imperfect, that marriage is imperfect, that you have to work on it day to day. And you have to realize what the Bible says, that you got to put your spouse first, your children come second. God first, then your spouse, then children. And, it's tough. Each day's tough. It's tough with the kids. It's tough when long day at work, come home, and then you got the kids trying to jump on you for hours on end, and then go to bed late, don't get much sleep. And I always want to spend time with her. I want to spend time with, we don't get much time together, like you said, with date night, but or we get frustrated with each other, and that happens too, different things, but it's perfectly imperfect. That would be the best way I could put it. And we have to trust God through it. When we're frustrated with each other or have issues with one another, then you always have to go back to God and back to prayer. And how she communicated with me in the garden the other day, it just helps me to pray for her better. And so that's the thing. Communication is a huge thing in any marriage. You got to communicate with one another so you know how to pray for one another better. You know how to love one another better as well.
I love that. Let's talk about communication. You guys have, with addiction and with wrestling with all of the things that you've wrestled with, it could be easy to run away and not create a safe place of open communication. So Stephanie, you can speak to that, or Kyle, you can speak to that. What has been, not that you guys have the perfect plan, but what has worked for you guys to create a safe place of open communication, to be able to share with each other in love what you're struggling with, what you're going through, so you don't hide it?
For me, it's transparency. I say all the time that secrets keep you sick. And so it's not secrets against him or anything, and it's not even really a secret, but if I don't talk about the things that are going on my heart, even if they're not about our marriage, if they're about family issues, outside issues, neighbor issues, if I don't talk about those things, they're going to start building. And that's when wormwood finds his way into my heart. And that's when he starts whispering, like Eve in the garden, did God really say that? Or he'll start, tempting me with greener grass. He'll start whispering those things and takes my focus off of God, off of the bigger picture. And so, does that make sense?
Yeah.
I would say for me, her reaction and changing her reaction to different things changes how I communicate. Because I think maybe I'm wrong, but I think a lot of married couples, especially men, they don't want to talk. They have a hard time talking about things in women, for sure. And, they may not want to talk about certain things in fear of spouse's reaction or what she might think.
The wrath of Stephanie.
But, her reaction and changing that, like she talked about how she reacts, it promotes communication. Now, where in the past, her reaction just did not promote communication. It was like, I'm going to hide this and hold it to my grave, because if I'm honest and I tell her, she's going to beat me up, so to speak, right? If I don't tell her, she finds out, same outcome. So it's, her changing that aspect of things definitely promotes more communication in our marriage with one another.
I think the biggest thing is counseling. I mean, I know we said it before that Jesus is the ultimate counselor, but you got to have a counselor. You got to have someone you can talk to. We have an amazing family counselor. His name's Pastor Bruce Andrew. He's out of the Harrisburg, Eugene area. And he he opens my eyes. And even though I go into the counseling session, I want to talk about this issue that we've got, God uses Bruce to speak to my life. You need to look at it through the mercy seat. You need to look at it through God's eyes. And this last counseling session about a month ago, Kyle and I were frustrated at each other, and I was talking to Bruce, and he's like, Stephanie, so what you're saying is you want to help all these people out of addiction. You want to help bring people to Jesus, but only the easy ones. Is that what you're saying? And I was just like, ah. And you reminded me that someone prayed for me for 15 years. So what if this fiance? What if what's going on with Kyle and our marriage? What if it does take 15 years? What if I give up after only 5 years? What if I give up after 7 years? We're going to miss the miracle. And so knowing that it's never going to be perfect, that we're constantly growing together, being sharpened, being molded together. Now we're molded together as one. God did a great work in both of us separately. Now we're going through the fire again together to become.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, Stephanie, that when you were struggling with wanting to know whether this marriage was going to work, you already had like a plan B in your head, like maybe a grass is greener on the other side kind of perspective. So what would you say to the listener or to the viewer that's in the middle of a hard marriage situation or maybe even a job situation, but let's focus probably more on relationship, and they want their plan B? How did you, while that might have been in your head, how did you not allow that to be an idol, and so you could be present in the story that God was writing?
This is a tough topic, just because we went to a church in Sweet Home a couple weeks ago, and Pastor Clinton, anyways, sorry, River of Life in Sweet Home, and the pastor was talking about Malachi and how God is the witness of your marriage. That really, really opened my eyes. But he also talked about how, he doesn't like the word victim, but there are victims of marriage. And so when I write this book, when we talk about this book, I don't want to leave those people out, because there are people who are abandoned in marriage and it's not their fault. There are people who have very harmful, devastating, painful marriages, and that's not what this book is about. This book is about our story and what God did in our lives. And so, what was the question again? Sorry.
Okay, just when you were in the mindset of thinking,
okay, of the plan B. And so in that, knowing that that God is the witness of our marriage, so that plan B, for me, I had to tell myself all the time, divorce is not an option. And that's why I wanted to be sensitive towards others, because I know it's a sensitive topic. But for me, in my heart, my vow, the day that we said I do, that was between Kyle, me, and God. And so it was constantly me separating the world out, and not only the world too, but even my Bible study girls, my soap sisters, they've got different opinions, but that's not what God was speaking to my heart. So I had to make my circle very, very small, and I had to silence everything else out so that I would focus on God. And I know that God wasn't entertaining plan B at all. That was the outside sources. And so for me, I had to focus on what God was saying, and that is divorce is not an option. And so we're going to get through this, as hard as it is. Divorce is not an option. Just like in our addiction, relapse for me is not an option. And so I kept telling myself that over and over again. And I kept reminding myself of the day that I met Kyle, and I knew in my heart that that was the man God had for me.
How has forgiving what you can't forget, not even just necessarily except in general, how has that changed your perspective on all sorts of categories in your life?
Christine Kane said in one of her devotionals, she said that you shouldn't forget the pain. And so in forgiveness, there's usually pain, and you shouldn't forget the pain, because the pain teaches you lessons that you can use. And the same with other areas of life. We all go through these trials and these lessons, and I believe wholeheartedly it's so God can use us to help other people. And so as we fight through this hard stuff and yucky stuff, God's going to use that to help so many other people that are struggling through similar situations. So knowing that you don't really forget, you forgive, you definitely forgive, but you don't forget, because it teaches such valuable lessons of hope and healing and how to get through things. And that's my thought. Sorry.
No, you're good. So we're going to end with each of you giving, not necessarily advice, it can be advice if you want to, but if you could give one piece of wisdom that you've learned about having this marriage that you surrender to the Lord, what would that be? What would that piece of wisdom be to the listener, to the viewer?
You go first.
Sure. I would say, I've got to talk to a lot of men through this struggle that also are struggling in their marriages with different things. And I mean, the number one thing I would say to keep a marriage going and to get through a tough time in a marriage is learning and applying what it means to give it to God, not to just say it, and learning how to pray for your wife, because I know I believe in the power of prayer without a doubt. It saved my life. That's what changes her heart is God and that prayer day in and day out. So I guess I would say those two things: learning how to pray for your wife and learning how to give it to God and surrender it to God.
For me, the kids are coming in. For me, it would be surface level and choosing, like I said in my book, that I chose to ignore the prompts to work on those issues. And be quiet, Bubba. It's choosing to dig deep and not stay surface level, because surface level is so much easier than working on the hard stuff. And that ultimately led to a disaster for us. And so that's my advice, is to, when God's putting something on your heart, to work on it. Don't push it aside. Don't ignore his prompts. When he says it's time to work on something, it's probably time to start working on it.